Herman, thank you so much for your time. I'm sure you've had quite a busy week.
It has been a busy week, yes.
It was a busy week even for people who weren't attending the summit, in terms of traffic, in terms of all the different ways that the city of Seoul came together for this. Well, how did you feel? Well, how do you feel now that it's over, actually?
Well, I'm a bit relieved. We got through it, and nothing too dramatic happened. Of course, you might think that reporters and correspondents like a lot of drama, but sometimes we just want to get through it without anything too exciting happening.
Well, being that we finally have it over, and there's over a year of planning for this, it's all done now. What would you say in terms of briefly covering some of the main points that were covered on the agenda, and maybe even just the general vibe at the end of it?
Well, I think for correspondents that this was an event where the sidebar meetings and one or two countries that weren't on the agenda completely overshadowed the nuclear security summit itself. So there was a tremendous amount of focus on the individual meetings that the leaders were having with each other. And there wasn't a lot of drama about the summit itself because the communique really didn't have anything binding, and there was no sort of last-minute negotiations going on, as you might find.
Thing.
Yeah, so it was a communique that obviously had been really agreed upon probably weeks, if not months in advance. There's nothing binding in it. And President Lee Myung-bak, in his remarks to reporters afterwards, really was focusing a lot on what had been accomplished after the initial summit 2 years ago in Washington and leading up to the summit, and not so much on what actually came out of the summit.
Yeah.
Although if you deal in this issue of non-proliferation, there were some significant agreements and commitments, especially dealing with highly enriched uranium, which can be turned into nuclear weapons and those sort of things. But I think these were mainly of interest to people who deal in this arena on a day-to-day basis.
So kind of a peaceful vibe in terms of all the countries coming together on the same page, reaffirming what was really established in Washington in 2010, right? Now, you mentioned one country that wasn't present at the summit being brought up a lot. I mean, let's go back a little bit. The announcement, North Korea, of course, we're talking about launching the satellite and the long-range missile. It was popping up a lot, though, not on the main agenda.
Right. There was nothing in the communique that referred to North Korea or Iran. And in most of the briefings, there was nothing about North Korea, although President Lee, in his closing remarks, when he got questions from the international media, did delve into the issue. And obviously, in the one-on-one meetings between, say, China and the United States, and other bilaterals that the Republic of Korea were having, that this was a major topic.
Right.
And a lot of news did come out of the summit as a result of these one-on-one meetings dealing with North Korea. And it was a very firm resolution, a message to Pyongyang that the international community, and even Moscow and Beijing to a great extent, are opposed to this launch, which the North Koreans, of course, claim will be a space launch to put a satellite into orbit.
I mean, as a journalist, you cover Korean news, you cover North Korea a lot, and in terms of China, being that it's North Korea's strongest ally, they always kind of tiptoe around this subject. Were you surprised at all with the direct remarks that came from President Lee?
I think they were relatively direct remarks compared to the rhetoric we've seen in the past, and I think most of us believe that President Hu and others in the Chinese leadership do share a tremendous amount of frustration, to say the least, with the leadership in Pyongyang. But the Chinese also feel that they're under a tremendous amount of pressure as the closest significant ally to North Korea to try to do something about it. And sometimes the Chinese push back on that.
Yeah. Even Russia, who, North Korea depended on a lot in the past, especially, we saw direct comments coming from them saying you should focus a little bit more on feeding your own people rather than such a launch. Do you feel, obviously, this is, not an outlook or prediction or whatnot, but I mean, in terms of all this international pressure, do you think it will come into play at all in changing North Korea, or we're just going to have to wait and see?
I grew up in Las Vegas, so it's a gambling
Gamble.
town. And if I was placing odds on the launch going ahead, I think it would be pretty good odds that the launch is going to go ahead.
International pressure wasn't always the most effective thing or strategy against North Korea in the past, right? Now, we mentioned a couple of bilateral summits, China, Russia with President Yi. Were there any else that popped up and really caught your attention? I mean, President Yi had like over 25.
Right. Well, frankly, we weren't paying attention to each and every summit that the host country was holding. For me, really, the highlight of these past few days were what the President of the United States was up to. And I'm not saying that just because I'm a correspondent for the Voice of America. The trip to the DMZ was very dramatic. It was a major story in the world, and also the President's speech at the Hanguk University of Foreign Studies, which I also felt was a significant foreign policy speech.
You were there for the speech.
That's right.
Any key, maybe lines or whatnot, or points that you want to touch on?
Well, the fact that the President of the United States, less than 200 kilometers away from Pyongyang, turned and made a direct appeal to the leaders in the DPRK, I thought was very significant. Mixing it with words of keeping the door open, saying that we have no hostile intent, yet being very firm, and in saying, if you go ahead with these sort of provocative acts, there will be further consequences in terms of what it will mean for the people of North Korea. So in that sense, it was quite a significant speech and a poignant speech.
A lot of things come out of the Seoul Nuclear Security Summit, that's for sure, but officially speaking, the Seoul communique is a focus. What were some measures introduced?
Well, there were some agreements involving getting rid of highly enriched uranium, which is what can be weaponized, and replacing that, for example, in fuel for research reactors in Europe with low enriched uranium. Italy was also one of the countries that pledged to get rid of all of its fissile material. So these are really the items that generated the most interest as far as the deals made. But again, what was accomplished at the summit was, in the words of the experts that we've been speaking with, was quite modest, and that's the word that they're using. And so I think there's on one hand, they're very happy that the summit did focus this issue internationally and give it a wider audience. But on the other hand, I think there's somewhat of a feeling that there were lost opportunities here, and that because this is such a vital and important issue, that there was nothing really of substance in the communique.
Now, I'm taking a look at foreign press sources, not just domestic news sources. What would you say, especially being that you, of course, represent foreign sources as well, is the kind of objective outcome or view on the outcome of the summit?
Well, I think you will see a lot of reporting really focusing on the North Korea issue. That the nuclear security issue is when you start to talk about fissile materials and non-proliferation and highly enriched uranium, people's eyes start to roll over. These are highly technical subjects. They're very important, but they're not the sort of stories that make front page headlines unless, of course, something goes very wrong.
Right, then it's headlines for weeks and weeks.
And many countries in the world are dedicated to trying to keep these materials from out of the hands of terrorists. So it is a highly important topic because if a mistake is made, the consequences can be really devastating for a country or the world. If you look at the front page today of, say, the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or the Times of London, this is not above-the-fold front page banner headlines here.
President Obama, President Lee Myung-bak, here's an understatement, they bump into each other pretty frequently.
Yes, I think this is the 7th time that they've actually met and held talks.
I think that's like the most for President Obama in terms of other world leaders, or up there, definitely.
It's definitely up there. And so that, I think, for the Republic of Korea is definitely a bit of an advantage in diplomacy, because the president here has been in office for a while. He has been able to develop this relationship with President Obama, whether they're meeting or talking to each other on the telephone. They obviously have some type of rapport, and they've been in the jobs for a while, so that's something important.
And it does definitely represent the strength of the bond, the relationship that Korea has with the U.S., especially even in your 2 years here in Korea. I'm sure you've seen a strengthening of the alliance between the two countries.
Well, I think a lot has been happening, and this really, for the United States and Asia, is a critical relationship. First and foremost, there is this long-standing military relationship between the two countries in the shared history, but also the fact that we now have this so-called free trade agreement. I don't like that word free trade agreement, but it definitely is a very, very significant trade pact between the two countries that hopefully will make some things more affordable for people in this country of products coming from the United States and vice versa. And that was a difficult one to negotiate with many twists and turns.
Oh, yes.
And so that you were able to have this good relationship between these two leaders, I suspect, definitely helped shepherd that relationship along. And then, of course, the fact that there are a lot of Koreans living in the United States, and there's a significant number of Americans not only serving in the U.S. military, but also working in business and teaching English here, that this is, despite the relatively small population of South Korea, say, compared to Japan or China, that this is a much larger relationship for the United States than based on the geographic size or the population of the country.
Mm-hmm. Well, we want to thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to more coverage about this by Voice of America.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.